All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to our panel on navigating innovation, investment, and impact in 2025. My name is Sabing Lee. I'm a attorney at Knobbe Martens. We're an IP firm here in Orange County. I'm the co-chair of our MedTech IP practice. We've been a proud sponsor of LSI since its inception. Really happy to work with so many of the companies here, and I think we have a great panel here today to talk about what their views are for 2025 on all these great topics. I'm going to ask the panel to do really brief introductions to themselves and maybe just speak about your investment focus if you have one. We'll go down the line and start with Anita.
Sure. Good morning. Anita Watkins, Rex Health Ventures. We're the corporate venture arm for UNC Healthcare. We invest all across the healthcare spectrum, so not just medtech. And our primary criteria is that we can be strategic to you and you can be strategic to us.
Hey, Omid, Akhavan. I run Anthro Ventures. We're a family office based out of DC. We invest across the spectrum of healthcare, medtech, healthcare services, really clinical through commercial stage opportunities.
I'm Justin Klein, co-founder of a firm called Vensana Capital. We invest in medical technologies, mostly medical device, but also digital health, diagnostics tools, at all stages of development. We're based in the DC area where I'm located, Minneapolis, and also California.
Josh Phillips. I'm a co-founder and managing partner with Catalyst Health Ventures. We're a Boston-based fund. We focus on therapeutic and diagnostic devices. We're relatively early stage, right around first in human is when we start our investments. No particular area of focus. We're just looking for good opportunities.
All right, let's start with the outlook for 2025. Hopefully, we'll have some hope here in the panel. We talked a little bit beforehand about whether we're going to be a pessimistic panel or an optimistic panel. So what is your view on the 2025 outlook? Omid, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to. I mean, we started off great. Market was ripping, everything was going well. And then next thing you know, people are being laid off from the FDA. They're coming back, they're gone, they're here, they're there. It's been a confusing time, I think. We're coming out of the last 2 years where capital has been difficult to find in the private markets, especially for medtech startups. And as you've listened to the panels over the last few LSIs, I think there's been a lot of shift on preserving portfolio companies, helping them extend runway. But I do think that there is a shift in investor mindset where now there are a lot of new opportunities on the horizon, and I think people are back to deploying capital. But
yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we've done 4 new deals in 6 months. I think that investors are seeing a lot of interesting technologies. As any entrepreneur in the audience here knows, there's definitely been a shift in valuation expectations, and I think that's helped loosen up some of the purse strings. But I do feel good that there's a lot of dry powder out there. There's a lot of funds that are still raising, and there's a lot of opportunity to really work together. It's something that teams like us look at of how we can work together to syndicate and really support the technology get to the next inflection point.
I agree with those comments. I think the year started well, and I think we came into this year with an expectation that the IPO markets would open, and I think we've seen some high-quality companies get public. There's also been good breadth of M&A activity, and having companies like J&J focus on growth markets like cardiovascular, I think has also been a really important driver in the sort of capital markets. So I feel like we're hopeful, in a positive sense. I think, we try to maintain a consistent pace or cadence of investing because we appreciate these markets move in cycles, and it's really hard to market time. And the value creation process also takes years, right? Not weeks or quarters. At the same time, we talked in our pre-planning session here, hope is not a strategy. It doesn't work in medtech. It hasn't. We've definitely proven that. And I think you have to pick your spots, very carefully by therapeutic area, stage, clinical, regulatory, reimbursement path, and really be thoughtful about the value creation path for the entrepreneurs, for the investors, and and acquirers or public investors. So trying to be very deliberate, and I think we'll continue that cadence, but that's kind of a sense of how we're seeing things.
Yeah, against that sort of macro backdrop of what's going on, I think we're really excited about innovation going forward. And I think there's a number of things that, we're seeing and that I've seen here from a number of companies where, whether it's, we're better understanding disease, we're bringing in new technologies, AI, machine learning, a number of different things that can contribute to the innovation and really provide solutions to problems and I'm seeing a number of whether it's sensor technologies and longer-term monitoring, which generates new data sets that have never been available before that can bring new insights. So we're seeing a lot of that, and we're really excited about it. But the reality is that comes crashing headlong into the structure of the medtech world. And I know we'll get into that a little bit more, but, if you bring in a long-term monitoring solution that provides really valuable insight into a chronic disease that allows that to be treated differently, how are you going to get paid for it? That doesn't really exist today in many cases. So we're very excited about the opportunities, but very careful about how it's going to be deployed within the construct of the medtech world.
So maybe you guys can give some practical examples about how you're helping your portfolio companies as they're either going through fundraising, they're on cash conservation. What kinds of things are you doing to work with the companies, and how should they work with you as their investors?
I'm happy to jump in there. I mean, having an entire health system at my fingertips to support our companies, it results in us being able to support them in a variety of ways. So a lot of cash conservation. I mean, any company right now, they're looking at how to conserve cash, but we also leverage our clinicians to help them advance their technologies. We even leverage our legal and IT if they've got to get through those approvals to just remove as much friction as possible in the commercial process. Our docs serve as PIs for the companies or advisors. So we really work. We want to truly be a strategic investor, and we're going to do everything we can once we invest to live up to that role.
So you're facilitating directly with the companies through your connections to help them with their resources?
Yes, good. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I think about investing, I always like to think about dollars to milestones. When you think about rounds, as people like to raise round numbers, I'm doing a $5 million raise, I'm doing a $20 million raise, I'm doing a $50 million raise. But I think it's always important to get to the nuanced details of where does that capital go? And are you raising money because that's what the funds want to deploy? Or are you raising the right amount of money to create the right amount of value and to de-risk? And as you're thinking about your budgets, are you being systematic about where you're spending capital? Are you hiring too many people too fast? Or are you thinking about, well, what happens if, you get the IDE approval and you're ready to start your clinical trial and your round takes another 6 months to close? And I think that's what happened to a lot of companies over the last few years where the markets tightened, investors were less willing to put money forward. And so how do you think about your budget and, lasting and maintaining a cadence of progress while being, kind of building the ship while sailing and trying to get to the next milestone and the next capital raise? So I think capital efficiency is paramount in this market.
Yeah, I think, hopefully as venture investors, we're serving on boards. We do our best to be really good, constructive partners at the board level continually. And beyond that, it's really very case by case. I mean, I think that we have an investment thesis and an alignment with our teams and our co-investors around what the company's setting out to do. It is never a straight line to accomplish those things. And for example, issues come up. For example, 3 weeks ago now, Doge laid off 229 people within CDRH. Across the board, multiple OHTs, biostatisticians, and it left a lot of discomfort in the market. We have tried to work with our companies to get in direct touch with each of the folks within those OHTs and the review teams to understand exactly how might they be impacted, who's coming back, and what to expect going forward. and what are the things that our companies can do proactively with FDA, for example, to facilitate efficient reviews and frankly share in the work that we're all trying to do together. Wouldn't have expected that, 4 weeks ago. So these things come up. We try to be involved in the ecosystem so we have the relationships and resources to assist our companies when the surprises happen.
Yeah, I think one of, often as a lead investor in the earlier stages, it's finding and helping the team to put together a syndicate, as Justin said, that are like-minded and aligned. And as you say, things go wrong all the time. You need to make sure that we're in alignment. And what we've seen from time to time is that, if you have 3 or 4 venture firms that are in a syndicate together, they can start to drift in their interests in what's going on, and keeping that all aligned is really important. So we spend a good amount of time doing that and making sure we have the right people in at the beginning, and whether it's a tranche financing, to make sure you have enough money to get all the way where you need to go in alignment with your, with the milestones you're trying to create, or at least making sure everyone's on board with that same plan.
Can you speak to any partnerships with strategic investors as well, in terms of syndicating and then having strategics as well come in along with funds like yourself?
Yeah, a number of our companies have strategics in them, some from the initial round, some that come in later on. I think our experience is they kind of operate on a spectrum. There are some who are very, very active and want to bring to the companies their expertise, whether it's in manufacturing or clinical or whatever it may be, all the way to those that, are quiet and maybe an observer and never say a word. And it's sort of in between and all over the spectrum. But we've, by and large, had very, very good relationships, and they're often in our companies.
Any preference between the type of strategic, or it makes no difference if they're getting the investment?
No, I think each one you go into and you kind of assess what their interest is and what they want to bring to the table, and it's kind of a case by case basis.
How are you guys seeing in terms of what companies are asking for? Do you find that they're realistic? Do you think they're undershooting, overshooting in terms of the ask? And anybody can take this one.
Well, I commented on valuation earlier. I think between cash conservation and balancing, CEOs are always sensitive to wanting to show that inflection point, wanting to show the increase of valuation, but you also have to listen to the market.
Yeah.
And so it is a tough balance. But right now, everybody's price conscious. And one of the deals we did this past fall was one that they've been raising for about a year, and then they agreed to some tweaks, made it a little more investor friendly, and we got a syndicate that included us and Medtronic, another health system fund, J&J, and we closed it, in a month or two. So it's if the technology's there, as long as the company's willing to come to reasonable terms, especially in this kind of market of unknowns right now, you can get a deal done.
Yeah. Let's talk about returns, because Justin, when we were talking in our prep call, we talked about what is a realistic return on an investment, what would be something that is a multiple that would be acceptable in terms of making it investable to a firm like yours. You want to speak to that in terms of what's realistic there, and what would you be looking for to represent your investor group?
Yeah, I think, look, as an asset class, we have to strive for above public market returns. That's often a benchmark that our LPs think about. So they often quote things in IRR. We're probably striving for 30% plus IRRs. And that's important because our investments are illiquid and, our LPs have alternatives. Often we also talk about a cash on cash return. And I think, the venture world, assuming reasonable time horizons and how capital gets deployed over time, 3x is probably a minimum, honestly, for the venture industry. If somebody's going to underwrite to less than a 3x, it's hard to get a 3x plus fund on 2x deals. So I think
harder, impossible.
Yeah. I think People also talk about, early stage, I need a 10x. Those are exceptional, honestly. So we don't really underwrite those cases either. But I think we do think a lot about the return or reward relative to the risk, time, capital, probability of success. And, for us, 3x is probably a minimum, and we're striving for 5x plus with reasonable assumptions, around how that investment's going to go. Sometimes, we may end up back at a 3x because things take more time and money. Sometimes we get to a 7, 8x, and occasionally it's a 10x plus. But I think that kind of bookends how we think about it. And then again, it's through that lens of what stage is this company at? What's the value creation path? How do we think about value, at exit, whether it's IPO or M&A? And we just have to kind of do the backwards math to arrive at a reasonable set of assumptions. Yeah.
Well, I was going to jump in because I think, everyone dreams of this $1 billion exit. And, we see these big headline numbers of these multi-billion-dollar acquisitions that get announced around JP Morgan or throughout the year. I think the challenge that I see is most medtech exits happen, in the $150 million range. And a lot of them are either undisclosed or, never reported. And so if you think about those kind of that as a benchmark and you work backwards and say, how much capital does it take to get a product to market, usually $10 to $20 million. Well, how do you engineer a return, right? If if you put in $20 million and you're expecting, let's call it a 5x, and you're capped at a $100 million exit, then the investor has to own 100% of the company to make 5 times their money. And so I think the challenge is finding that balance in terms of how do you create value with limited resources, limited capital. And then because there are very few, and maybe this is my biased view, but there are very few real billion-dollar markets left in medtech that don't have, innovative solutions. Obviously, there are always new disease areas that are transforming and evolving. But in terms of, you want this billion-dollar market opportunity, you want to convince investors to pour money into it. A lot of innovation has happened, right? There's been innovation for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And so being transformative in a market, you have to be very careful thinking about the balance of how much capital it take to go address this brand new billion-dollar opportunity versus where your realistic exit is sub $100 million. And, how do you convince an investor to get behind that is, always the challenge in the early stage.
So I beg to differ a little bit. I think that there are a lot of billion-dollar opportunities. I think and as I said at the beginning, we're really optimistic about the level of innovation. There are challenges to getting to it, though, and I think there are going to have to be some changes. We talked about this in the pre-call. Reimbursement is the big issue here, and innovation means new. New is difficult when it comes to that. CMS doesn't like new and new ways of doing things, but I do think there are a lot of opportunities out there, but it's finding them and understanding how to get to them and manage those risks and those challenges along the way, which is saying actually the same thing around capital efficiency, is making sure that you are. So,
Josh, can we elaborate on that? Because in our pre-call, we talked about innovation, how you assess innovation as you're balancing it against whether something's investable, the time that it's going to take to get into patients. And so and maybe you can speak to some recent examples, because I know you've made some investments for companies that you thought were innovative, but how do you look at innovation for something that is going to take a really, really long time and a lot of money to get to market versus something that perhaps has more competition, but has still a pathway forward?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of investments in, I guess, what in the grand scheme of things would be considered sort of patient monitoring. One is in EEG and one is in blood pressure. And the way we've approached those is that the long-term plays for those are going to be, again, longer-term monitoring, generating completely new data that no one's ever had. EEG over 6 months or 3 months. No one's ever had that before. So what can you learn with that? However, it's balanced with an existing market. So there's already a market for EEG in hospital and out of hospital that we can immediately plug into. Blood pressure continuous in the hospital is a market today. It's $1 billion market. So we have these opportunities where the new technology can fit into an existing play that on its own is really exciting. But then the future applications of it create completely new ways of looking at, whether it's seizure detection or epilepsy or stroke or other neurological conditions that no one's ever been able to look at them over a long period of time. But you're based on an existing market where you can play, where you have something transformational in that market where there's already reimbursement. There's, the FDA really understands it. The hospitals understand it. People understand it. So we're looking for those types of things that kind of balance the two aspects of it.
The key is getting paid for the upside associated with, future potential. Because that may take a lot of different time and money. And companies are acquired generally when they can be productive assets in the hands of the acquirers, right? You could show me a magic wand and tell me that this magic wand does magic every time and cures the condition, is a healing magic wand. No risk whatsoever. It's going to get FDA approved. I still can't underwrite that for a 2X, right? You could take all that risk off the table because if there's no codes and payment and coverage policies for the magic wand procedure, we're going to spend 5 years, climbing the hill and defining those things. And there's uncertainty, to the path, the timing, and the money required. And even in our space, there's uncertainty to how that M&A process might play out when you've validated everything and even start driving revenue. So it's really challenging to kind of filter investment opportunities through the lens of money and time. But when you come back to your question of kind of what's the reasonable ask or expectation, everybody in our ecosystem has to realize how hard it is and, look at the data on where returns are as a category for the last 10 years. And we all have to do a better job kind of finding the efficiencies, getting these innovations to patients and creating, real economic value for the whole flywheel to work.
I'll just add, one of the things that I think companies need to understand, especially if your device is going to be used within a health system, is the pressure that health systems are under right now. They're low margin businesses to begin with, and it's really challenging. So, I see a lot of companies that it's a nice to have, and it costs 3 times the amount of what's being used today with incremental patient improvement. That it's just not something that's ever going to be commercially viable within a health system. Price parity is important. It's hard ROI, both from an efficiency standpoint within healthcare, and then also hard ROI on patient outcomes. You've got to be able to demonstrate all of those. Just saying that, it's a magic wand, I agree. There's so many other factors that have to be considered, at least in the world within, if it's in the hospital.
So on the impact on patients, I'm assuming everybody here is in this business because you want to make a positive impact on patients. Do you feel that the investability goes hand in hand with that? Or when you see something that's really impactful, even though the returns aren't as great, is that something that's still of interest to you?
So you're asking if we see something that's impactful, but the returns aren't...
Returns or the time to getting to patients, there's a lot of obstacles to get it there.
I think we all have, each of our funds, we have an investment thesis and criteria that have to be met. If it's really exciting, then the return should be there.
Right.
They should go hand in hand. But if it doesn't meet our fundamental investment criteria, it's going to be hard to get across the finish line.
Yeah.
I think for us, the answer is yes. We're always really interested in those things. The question is this the right moment in time for us to invest? And I absolutely, I went to medical school to help people. I do venture because I want to have an even bigger impact than I could have as a physician or a surgeon that sees so many patients a week. But those realities are real. And a lot of times we work with, follow, even informally help companies for 3 to 4 years before we make an investment and get involved because we want them to be on that trajectory to have the impact. But from a financial return standpoint, we have to look at later rounds where, we can get back into the window of, risk-adjusted returns that make sense for us. So we hope to do that.
I mean, and I think to your point, it's how do you balance the social return, right? We're all in healthcare because we want to have a positive impact on the health of humanity. The challenge is that the returns in medtech are typically not very good. Returns in tech, and you look at now all these AI companies emerging, and autonomous robots and things like that. Maybe that's a better place to invest for return. But I think fundamentally why at least we invest in healthcare and continue to invest in healthcare is because there is a positive impact and a social benefit. On the flip side, you still have to make sound business decisions. And if you can figure out how to innovate and how to invest and generate a return while making that impact, then you have, a double bottom line. And so, for us, at least as a family office, we peg to the market, we invest in real estate, we do a diverse set of investments. But the reason we're still in healthcare is because we see value to society.
Yeah, I think if you're going to have a major impact, then I think kind of by definition, these patients aren't being served today, which means there is a real opportunity. And if it's making a real impact, the potential returns can be tremendous. The key is, can you realize that potential? So again, being able to identify something like that where you can have the impact, but yet navigating through to generate the returns that are commensurate with it is a real challenge. But it can be done. We got to find those companies.
So none of you have referred to yourself in the term that we talked about in our pre-call as mavericks. But maybe you can speak to that as to, do you view yourselves as unique in the investment community in that I think I'm hearing optimism from all of you, or do you think other investors are like-minded? So does anybody want to speak to that?
So I think we seek out, investors that are like-minded. That's why we work together, that we want to find the right syndicate. I do think that there is a level of risk averseness out there that I get, but I've seen funds. The thing that frustrates me the most is to watch a fund drag a company along for 6-9 months, a year, and then pass. Don't do that. So while I think we're optimistic, there's still an element of the market out there that is tough. That hopefully, I don't know, that will inspire folks today.
Well, no, but I think to your point, what does it mean to be a maverick? It means that you're trailblazing. And I look at the entrepreneurs in this audience, and you are setting on a hard journey without a playbook to know how to address that problem. And I think we as investors, come along that journey with you, right, as we invest, and we are working together to figure that out. And I think that it's so important to remain humble, that none of us have the answers, right? Even us with our decades of experience investing, operating, studying medicine, we don't have the answers. And so I think it's a collaboration between the investor and the entrepreneur to figure out how you solve these big problems and how you overcome the reimbursement, regulatory, commercial challenges that exist.
All right, we're like 10 seconds away from being done. So any parting thoughts of wisdom from anybody?
I would say just be tenacious and keep at it. Try to find the right investors to fit with what it is you're doing.
Great. All right. Thank you to our panel for us today. Anybody has questions, we'll be outside, and I forget the name of the room, but everybody will be around down the hall, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you.